and welcome to AT Talks, the Assistive Technology podcast. We will be your backseat driver, your road trip buddy, and instant pocket mentor for the times you need a refresher. I'm Tammy.
And I'm Kate, and we are excited to welcome you into our digital space. We hope through this podcast you will learn more about specific assistive technology and its place in your allied health practice.
We hope that you learn new things, solidify information you already know, and maintain a reciprocal partnership by asking questions through our DMs. Based off the discussion in part 1, a variety of questions have come up from our listeners, and we are excited to have Jeni Dabelstein back in the virtual podcast room to answer a few of our questions.
Today we are continuing our discussion about wheelchair seating and positioning. The aim for this episode is for us to answer your questions that arose from the previous one. If you have already listened to part 1, you would have met our lovely guest Jeni. As introduced in the last one, Jeni is a physiotherapist who has worked within the disability sector for over 3 decades. Jeni works exclusively as a clinician and consultant in the area of prescribing complex assistive technology and founded Gizmo Rehabilitation in 2010. Jeni is a current board member of Australian Rehabilitation Assistive Technology Association. And Jeni, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be back.
We have got multiple questions sent from our listeners, and some would like, and I'd like to know some for myself as well. So we'll just get started. Kate has our first question.
Awesome. So Tammy and I are both new graduates at the end of the year. In terms of prescription recommendations, what should we not be doing as new grads or novice clinicians?
Look, I think it can be a big, scary world for new clinicians. And I think the most important thing is probably not to be dazzled by the product, but keep your eye on your client and be solution focused, not product focused. And I really think to do that, you need to think strategically, but also understand what your big goals are for this equipment. Just understand places like where this person needs to go and how it's going to get there and how it's going to interact with other equipment. All the things that the things that this piece of equipment needs to do on a daily basis. Sometimes I even get my clients to tell me a typical day outline. They get out of bed. They say, I get out of bed at 8:30. I say, how do you do that? They say, I hop from my commode into my wheelchair. I go, can you show me that? So, I get an idea of how they're going. If they've got a car, I go and look at it. If they've got a workplace or places they go regularly, often I'll ask for a few pictures of those. And from that, we'll get a really good idea of the big picture goals, and then we can break that down into little bite-sized chunks about what the wheelchair, what the seating, what the general system needs to do or achieve. And then we can start matching our product to our objectives. And then our product just becomes a tool to achieve the objectives. Now, if just getting around the place was the goal, we could all still be going around in horse and carts, but people choose wheelchairs these days. They're possibly more compact and portable. You don't need to feed the horse. There's a whole heap of reasons that you might choose something. So, I'd really say just keep solution focused. Don't be product focused. It's not your job to know about every product in the world. It's your job to be able to ask the right questions to see if the product meets your client's needs. And you do need to be able to, as a clinician, draw a really clear line between your product choices and the client's objectives and goals. That's what you're there for. You need to be able to justify that. And I think, I would caution new graduates on moving outside their scope of practice. Scope of practice, you start to realise that you're pushing the edges when you stop being able to draw a nice clear line between the product that you're selecting and the goals and objectives of the client. When you can't answer that question, is this good enough? If you get to that situation, while the advice of vendors is fantastic, at the end of the day, you're responsible for your clinical decisions. So if you can't make it clear clinical rationale for a choice, then you need to go and find another clinician to help you or support you, because you're coming up against the edges of that clinical scope of practice. And I guess I would just caution, in the current environment, there's quite a lack of experienced allied health professionals in assistive technology. And I guess with my Ulyate board hat on, we are noticing that younger therapists, even new graduates, been putting into situations where they're expected to operate outside their scope, and that creates a lot of risk for the client. It creates a lot of risk for the allied health professional, and I would encourage anybody, if they feel like they're being pushed outside their scope, to say, hands up, no, I need help, because help is there.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, and I think it's so important then to remember to reach out to those supervisors or our colleagues or anyone with a fair bit or with more experience than us. So it's such a great reminder to know that. Yeah, so thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. On to the next question. I guess looking at the product, is it challenging to prescribe and fit little bodies, big bodies and atypical shaped bodies to wheelchairs, acknowledging, I guess, the environmental factors as well?
Yes, sometimes it is. You know, most assistive technology is designed anthropomorphically for a standard, healthy, typical adult. So if you are not a standardly proportioned, typical adult, then the equipment may not fit you well, it may not function well, or it may need to be adjusted or set up quite differently for you. So if you're looking at the pediatric population, we're looking at little people who have different proportions to grown-ups, so their centre of gravity and their balance is different in sitting to an adult. And they're also expected to change markedly over time. So if you think about the difference in size and body proportion between a toddler and a 12-year-old, it's quite vast. So we need to, I guess one of the things I would say about children is that wheeled mobility is just one choice for mobility. What's most important is that we offer children success in mobility if we're choosing a mobility device. So for children, we're often putting more emphasis on activities and participation when we're prescribing their wheelchair. So we're not putting so much emphasis on body structure and function because we're prioritising activity and participation, and we're expecting shorter duration bursts of activity. So for a child, I need to set up their chair so it fits, but also so they can function as easily as possible. And that might mean that they can't sit for a really long time. They might get tired. They might have to sit in something else, and that's fine, because children often have many pieces of equipment and they get out. And I guess one of my bugbears, is, you know, the old allowing for growth, fitting children's chairs that are just way too big, that are set up poorly for wheel access, that have, you know, everything but the kitchen sink hanging off them, which makes them heavy and clunky and hard to push. You need to step back and say, what's your goal? And if your goal is to make this little child mobile and independent and able to play with her friends, you really need to keep your eye on the ball and set up the chair for that. If you looked at the other end of the scale, in the bariatric population, adults that are quite large, often that body structure and function is paramount because fit becomes much more challenging in the physics of setting up the wheelchair. So for a bariatric client, often their centre of gravity is relatively high and relatively forward. So I have to push the rear axle quite a way forward to get enough weight off the front casters so that they can push it. Often because their body is a lot wider than their shoulders, they have poor wheel access. So I have to allow them to do a little bit of foot propelling if they're capable of that. Their respiration will often be compromised by a seat to back angle. It's too close, so I have to open up the seat to back angle. They will often have compromised respiration, so I have to offer good arm support. So for that larger body, there's often a lot of physical things around the setup that will make that wheelchair functional and comfortable to sit in, whereas with the child, I'm probably more focused on those activities and participation areas. But I will say that environment is really difficult with bariatric clients sometimes, because once you get a very large wheelchair, you start over about 20 inches, it really starts to compromise how they can move around. But at the end of the day, a person has to fit in a wheelchair. So the person and the equipment have to be right, and then the environment may need to be modified. And for example, a manual wheelchair in 20 inches will generally be wider than a power wheelchair in 20 inches. So sometimes we have to have conversations about different types of mobility that might be a bit slimmer to move around. We also have to be realistic about their capacity to push themselves, which is often not high. So in the modern area of occupational health and safety, often we're looking at power options a lot earlier for bariatric clients because of the OH&S issues that are around them. Atypical shapes and atypical sizes need a bit of lateral thinking. And then, of course, you have that group of clients who have lifelong congenital conditions who have never had typical body proportions. I'll use J cushions as an example. A typical cushion designed for a standard adult pelvis that works on suspension, that's a J cushion. So if I have a client with spina bifida who has an atypically shaped pelvis and atypically developed heads of femurs, that cushion is not mechanically going to work for them. So you need to recognise if your client's atypical shape or dimensions is actually incompatible with some of these different products that are out there. But again, that can be a good question to ask your vendor or another clinician if you're not quite sure. I think the most important aspect for you guys as new clinicians is to understand your client and understand that this isn't quite typical. So what do I need to do different? What's not going to suit in this situation?
No, for sure. And I think there's a lot of things to consider, and just to know that, we don't have to know everything. There are people that we can go to for those atypical type things. And I guess, as a new grad, there are some conceptions that we already have of wheelchairs. What is a common misconception that seems to persist in the world of wheelchair seating and positioning that you have found?
Unicorns, I think, with mythical creatures that gamble around in forests. The wheelchair that does everything perfectly in all environments and situations is also generally a unicorn. In the AT world, we have generally trade-offs, and I think it can be difficult to get your head around as a new grad that there actually isn't a right solution.
Yeah.
There are some wrong solutions, and probably what you'll have is a on balance best solution that does most of the things most of the time. And that can be a great source of conversation with your client when they say, I'd like a chair that tilts in space, but I drive a Holden Barina. I'd like my Carrera to be able to fold it up and put it in the bag. Say, I'd really like that too.
Mary Poppins.
But in the real world, it's really hard to find a product that does both those things. So what's more important? Being able to transport it in your client's chair, in your carer's car, or being able to sit in it for really long periods because it tilts.
Yes.
And that's not a decision for me to make. That's a decision for the client to clarify what's most important, and it will be a trade-off. And it also means that for some clients, not one piece of equipment will do everything. So sometimes we need to have 2 or 3 pieces of equipment that are more environmentally specific, that together will form a complete package, rather than trying to shovel everything onto the one chair. And I'll give you an example there. Like, I see a lot of clients who have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, like hypermobility syndrome, which often goes with a lot of chronic fatigue and postural issues which cause them to faint. So for those clients, sometimes what we end up doing is a really lightweight portable wheelchair that someone can throw in the back of the car to take them quickly to appointments.
True.
But because they have no capacity to push themselves, we might give them a power device that they can operate themselves. Sometimes a portable one that, with a bit of help, someone can put in the car for them. And then I've got another client who we did a scooter for as well. if she needed to travel 5 kilometres to take her little boy to school and back, or to go down to the shops, and a portable device wasn't going to hold up to that type of activity. So all of those 3 pieces of equipment ended up costing us, I believe, about $15,000. And if we tried to put it all in one, it would have been a $35,000 tilting power wheelchair that was incompatible with the transport and our home situation, and just was total overkill. So sometimes you need to stand back and say, let's not go chasing unicorns. Let's write down all the things that need to happen and see how most economically and efficiently we can put together a package that'll meet all those needs.
Yeah, wonderful.
So important for us to remember. And and I think you've already touched on this next question through knowing our scope, but I'll ask it anyway. As a novice practitioner or a grad student, new graduate, what's the most important thing for us to remember?
I think keep your clinician hat on and keep asking questions. Get curious. When in doubt, ask a question. That's my general modus operandi. So when in doubt, I just keep asking questions. And I just keep asking questions until I start getting a clearer picture of things. And I guess my other tip is take lots of photos. Whenever you do an assessment with a client and equipment, sure, write down what's happening, but take photos. Keep an eye on all those details and take pictures of them so that you have something to come back and look at afterwards and discuss and think about. And it's also a record of what happened that's quite concrete that you can come back to and refer to. So I think if you are very curious and keep asking lots of questions and keep taking lots of pictures, eventually things will become clearer to you.
No, that's some really great advice. And I think something that we are we are often afraid to ask for help, and I think it's just broadening our knowledge and using those around us. So it's so important. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for listening to today's episode. However way you're listening to this podcast or whatever time of day it is, we do hope that it has sparked some interest for you in the area of wheelchair prescription and open your eyes to look through a physiotherapist's lens. We hope your confidence and knowledge has built from listening to Jeni's wisdom and experience.
If there are questions that have arisen from this conversation with Jeni and you wish her to answer them, please contact us through the details in the poddy description. Furthermore, if there are other topics you wish for us to discuss or want to get involved and be a guest on one of our podcasts, please contact us.
Jeni, we are so thankful that you could join us in this 2-part episode. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and experiences. I know Kate and I feel so much less intimidated by wheelchair recommendation now than we did before.
Yeah, thanks, girls, for inviting me. I just encourage all the listeners out there to think about working with assistive technology, especially wheeled things, wheelchairs and seating. It is actually a really fun and challenging area to work in, and we need more practitioners joining us. So I hope to hear from more USC students soon.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we look forward to hearing from our new guest speaker in the next episode, and we hope you listen along with us. Bye for now.